This is Gaming with Magus. I am Magus, and we have a director's take that's dropped on us, and I thought I would go ahead and cover it. It's been a large conversation about the game and how we need to move forward because it seems like there seems to be an issue with Overwatch. People aren't happy the way it is, and any amount of change they're doing isn't making a difference on it, or a minimal difference. So it's important that we talk about this because there was discussions to talk about this big change with the team, but the Overwatch team didn't want to talk about it. So now that they're talking about it, we can have this conversation and see what we need to do for the health of the game. I'll have some thoughts on this after the fact, but we're going to go ahead and read through this and see what they say about this and what's coming up, and then go from there. All right, so let's go ahead and read into this. Director's take, opening up the conversation on 5v5 and 6v6. Hi everyone, there's been a lot of talk of 6v6 lately, and it's only intensified in recent weeks since we posted our last director's take and made a Twitter post prompts to talk about it in the future. Well, now is the future, and this is the next piece, so let's get into it. Wait, let's not get into it quite yet. This is a pretty complex and nuanced topic, and it gets to the beating heart of what makes the game tick. Our players have different opinions, preferences about the ideal number of players in Overwatch match, and so does our team. We're a microcosm of a broader community and discuss this internally, and I'm hoping that this piece will serve as an introduction to our own discussions and jumping off point to the engage with you all. I'd also like to set a few expectations and ground rules. First, it's pretty long. Raiders are going to lose their voices reading this one aloud. I'll survive. If you like a TLDR, the what's next section should suffice. Secondly, I'm not here to tell you what you ought to like or even what's empirically better. This is a game, and your preference for fun is relative to your own taste and ability and experience. Lastly, there are years of decisions that affect such a fundamental piece of Overwatch. Some of you might neatly be aware of these, while others might not. Before diving in, I'd like to set the stage and give some context on larger changes to the game, ultimately culminating in the 5v5 format today. So this is for the people who just got into the game, never played Overwatch 1. I mean, it came out in 2016. Some of you might not have been old enough to play at the time, or maybe you were sucked up in the games like Fortnite, Apex, and you came over recently. I can understand why they want to give the context, but it also helps set the reasoning behind what they're doing. Historical context. There have been 3 large format changes to Overwatch. First happened shortly after the game was launched. There was hero limits. Before, there could be any number of particular hero on one team. You could have 6 Genjis, 6 Reinhardts. If my memory serves me right, winner of Team 4's first internal tournament was 1 Winston, 5 Zenyatta's. It was called a Quinston, and the Zenyatta orbs stacked with no cap at the time. It was glorious and terrifying. During early development, it was necessary to have duplicate heroes per team. Our first core combat milestone only had 4 heroes. That makes sense. As the roster grew, this was no longer necessary, and it also introduced issues. Overwatch heroes have distinctive kits and impactful abilities. Stacking abilities could be fun, but it also posed challenges to balancing many of those abilities in game. People reference double barrier, but back then you could have 6. Imagine cycling 6 immortality fields. Immortality fields is a problem. Period. The number of team compositions and strategies available was huge. The variety was great, but we didn't feel like they could ever truly balance the game without severely watering down our heroes. So we made the choice to impose a limit of each hero per team. This essentially solved the issue of ability stacking, but it did have a few side effects. It traded some creativity in putting team compositions together for more consistent, balanced experience. It took away some choice from players. If you wanted to play as Tracer, but you were already Tracer, they would be unable to. The theme of this, future decisions, was limiting match variety as well as player freedom and creativity in order to create a more balanced, consistent, competitive experience for players. Remember this point because we'll touch on it a few more times in this piece, and I think Pure Limits rule was a great decision and we would make it again. The other 2 large format changes have a lot of positive benefits, but they're not as clear cut. So that's a change, clearly, that they made because it was more of a debug mode, if you will. Yeah, I could see, I think we're all probably in agreement that hero limits like that were important to have. It also looks weird when you have 2 of the same heroes. I mean, you already have enough between the 2 teams, but, you get the idea. The second large change to the game's format was the move from open queue to role queue, which limited teams' compositions to 2 heroes from each role. Before roll queue, there was no enforcement of 2-2-2 team composition, and the players had the freedom to select any role they like once they loaded into a match. With open queue, teams had the freedom of choice of what heroes and T composition to play. There's quite a few problems with roll queue intended to address. Prior to implementing roll queue, there was a stark imbalance in number of people playing each of the roles in each match. Damage was, by far, and still is today, the most popular role, and tank by far the least popular. In fact, seeing matches with 5 or even 6 damage players on each team was not uncommon. These roles imbalance frequently led to wildly imbalanced matches between teams. The game played better when the heroes from all 3 roles were selected. The disparity caused social issues as players would try to pressure other players into playing tank or support roles, even if they didn't want to. It made balancing heroes more difficult since we couldn't balance around certain role ratios of each team. It even made introducing new heroes more difficult since any hero kit had to take into consideration hundreds of different team compositions and abilities that overlap. Move to role queue format was aimed to mitigate these challenges. Okay, I get that. Moving to role queue solved many of those issues, many of these problems, and added some additional benefits to the game as well. With role queue in place, matchmaking is based on skill within a given role, not just skill overall. Some players have wildly different skill ratings per role. That's true. So the ability to matchmake around a set roles provides big, immeasurable boost in match quality. Role queue also solidified the identity of each role, and fantasy of doing the role's job became clear. Also, it allowed you a smaller subset of heroes that you had to learn, than if you had to learn all the heroes. So I get that. However, the switch to role queue system did have some downsides, the largest of which was longer queue times. Yep. Prior to roll queue, matchmakers needed to find just 12 players of similar skill level in order to put a match together. The roll queue needed to find 4 players of each role to make a match. The total number of players queuing has no effect on this. It's almost solely governed. Wait a minute. Total number of players queuing has no effect on this. It's almost solely governed by the ratio of people queuing for the least popular role. Okay. Given the game's lower relative ratio of players queuing for tank than the other damage and support roles, queue times went up. We'll go into the details later. The team tried to address this imbalance in various ways. They introduced priority passes that give players who played low demand roles tanks a short queue time when they switched to damage. This had a positive effect for several weeks, but its influence quickly faded. Also introduced systems to reward players for playing tank, eventually giving them a loot box and a bunch of XP for queuing that role. None of these were able to put a dent in the demand for playing DPS. Damage queue times drifted a bit lower, high, but much of this is due to the introduction of OPQ competitive and the permanent loss of players unwilling to wait that long for a match. Okay. There were additional drawbacks to roll queue, and I mentioned earlier that many of our decisions made improvements to the game at the cost of match variety and player freedom. Team compositions were now locked at 2-2-2. This was another step towards more consistent experience with Overwatch. Sometimes the consistency we start to feel samey. There are some pretty exciting metas in the pre-roll queue world, and swapping heroes to a different role mid-match was often a bigger change and more exciting than swapping to one of the same role. Like hero limits, roll queue took away part of the freedom in selecting heroes that serve as the base of Overwatch. But I often wonder if the success of it is as clear cut and dry as that of hero limits. Could there be an in between version that softens the original problems without completely solving them? Also, it isn't quite as restrictive as current role queue system. A bit more on that later. My guess is what he's talking about is you have to have one healer, you have to have one DPS, you have to have one tank. But let's say you have 2 flex roles. That could be either tank, DPS, or healer. That would add variety to a certain extent, or maybe just one variety a little bit. Maybe do 2 healers, 1 tank, 1 DPS, but one could be a float, and he can be like a tank, a DPS, or a healer. That would add variety without breaking it too much. We'll see what they do with that. The third and major format change. These challenges, as well as longer queue times, led us to the third and most recent format change to the game. The shift from 6v6 to 5v5. This is almost a blog within a blog, but we're going to cover 3 things. Why we switched to 5v5, queue times after the switch to 5v5, and what the team thinks about 6v6. Here we go. We switched to 5v5, and there's many reasons behind the transition to 5v5. When we launched Overwatch 2, we talked about greater individual agency that players could have in over 5v5. The Overwatch is a team sport and it requires players to rely on each other to be successful. This was even more the case previously, and the game could be frustrating if your team was out of sync. Many times, fights in 6v6 couldn't be resolved until ultimate abilities came online. Correct that. Until ultimate combos could be executed to break through two tanks worth of mitigation, supported by high uncontested healing output. The world of 6v6 could have really high highs but really low lows. One of the design goals of 5v5 was to try to raise that floor, even though it was at the expense of some of those high moments. No, I think some other things came at the expense of those high moments. Kirizuzu, Immortality, and some other ones. Yeah. Anyway, Overwatch 2 has a greater emphasis on FPS gameplay. There's less damage mitigation in CC. That's a lie. And players get to shoot at enemies more. Maybe at the beginning of Overwatch 2. Crowd control could take players out of the game for extended periods of time, especially when they were chained back to back. A 5-second hack on Sombra hack. Hey, listen, her hack is still crazy. Mace freeze or primary fire, it's still there. Brig bash, sorta. Anna sleep, still there. Orisa Holt's gone. Sigma rock, still there. Could all happen consecutively to one player. Typically, a tank could often survive this onslaught, at least in game. The real life mental health was another story. Damage heroes often complain that the role was least impactful relative to the strength of their super powerful tank synergies, and support heroes undoing their playmaking. Emphasis on ability cooldown management, ult tracking, and shooting barriers instead of players, and not big enough timing windows to just shoot enemies and get eliminations were all factors contributing to this feeling. Support heroes also had to focus less on exclusive healing since they were a bigger team health pools. More incoming damage on the field than the additional tank player. In 5v5, they had more agency to add some damage or duel other heroes. Tank synergy wasn't always fun. It slowed the game down, stabilized it, but sometimes absolutely ground it to a halt. People point to the double shield meta as an example of this. It wasn't just about double shields, though. The ability to stack very defensive heavy lineup, especially in game modes that required team to push through a small choke, caused a lot of matches to feel like there were no progress at all. The game is faster now, but it typically doesn't stall out. It feels like there's more room to move around the map without the need to earn every inch of it. 5v5 fights are often less focused, moving around in death ball formation, and there's more angles to take, flanking, dueling other players, which brings in more of a FPS gameplay. While 6v6 can have high moments, it's also hard to follow. Tracking 9 players is easier than 11. There's fewer visual effects on screen, especially during big fights. Overwatch is a pretty demanding game, and moving 5v5 made it more cognitively manageable. Lastly, one of the biggest benefits of 5v5 was dramatic reduced queue times. Let's explore that. Queue time and data context. The chart below shows ranked, keyword ranked, queue times per role after introduction of role queue to Overwatch in 2019. Compared to role queues in Overwatch's 5v5 role format, as you can see, the shift of 5v5 role queue dramatically reduced queue times for players in all roles, most notably damage role, which is the most popular role. Okay. The biggest factor driving the difference between Overwatch and Overwatch 2 queue times in that ratio of queuing players for each role. We hear players speculate that the long queue times are a result of not enough players playing Overwatch, and that isn't the case, but instead, that's relative to the other roles. Players generally queue less tank, or tank less, leading to longer queue times for all while we wait for a tank to free up to find a proper match. So, in practice, the actual ratio of players queuing for tank damage and support is much closer to 1-2-2 format than it was the previous 2-2-2 format. As a result, 5v5 role queue format better mirrors the actual player's interest in each role, making the switch result in shorter queue times. Okay. The sharp drop off in queue times in October of 2022 is when Overwatch 2, along with the 5v5 shipped, the queue times of all heroes dropped and now are much shorter than they were in 6v6 world. Also, you made your game free to play. So the barrier entry to signing up was less, and more your friends could get on. Plus, people were re-checking out the game because they heard about it, and there was this talk about this PvE that never showed up. This is almost all because the game required one less tag team match. I highly doubt that. If you look at the current queue times, you can see that there is a still lack of tanks compared to other roles. Just flipping the switch and returning to 6 would likely cause a return to previous queue times or worse. Maybe. Regardless the amount of players in game, queue times are always reflective of how many people are queued per role. In other words, the main driver increase in queue times in the ratio of players queued in each role. Since there are less players queuing as tanks, queues would likely go back to the way they were before. Thoughts on 6v6? The game started its life with 6 players on each team. I discussed why we moved away from 6v6, but that doesn't mean it's without any merit. There were moments of madness that could happen with 12 players in a match that just couldn't quite coalesce when there are 10. Almost too much to keep track of. Correction, it was too much to keep track of at times, but that was part of the charm. There are big moments in Overwatch 2 that don't quite have the same chaotic over the top feeling. Part of the chaos allowed players to feel less pressure in a match. There was an extra player to take up a bit of the slack for someone that's performing poorly. And since the player was a tank, they had quite a bit of impact. There was a lot more hit points, defensive points to burn through, and they had a sizable effect on the gameplay. Teams will fold a bit slower than they do now. They don't go busted and then fall apart. We went over some of the issues of tank synergies earlier, but having 2 of them allowed one to focus on protecting their backline while the other held ground or pushed into the enemy team. The tank role had a lot of depth and understanding on how to work with other tanks on the team. This part of the mastery curve took a long time to learn, and the small group of people devoted to it, that was part of the allure. We mentioned the difficulty in balancing tanks for 6v6 earlier, but the past year and a half has shown us that the issues with balancing tanks for 5v5 as well. For much of Overwatch, 2 tanks have been fairly balanced. Junker Queen, sorta. Ramach has been off and on. I don't know. But when one of them become a powerful outlier like Melga, that can be felt strongly in the world of one tank. What's next? Okay, that was a lot of setup. Think I put more effort into this essay than I wrote in college. Wow. Okay. So where do we go from here? At the end of the day, we want to make a game that players want to play. Because of the challenges mentioned previously, we focused on making 5v5 the best experience that it can be. However, because we operate as a service to our players, we always remain open-minded to reevaluating our decisions based on your actions and feedback to give you the best game experience we can. Rather than introduce a disruptive, permanent change to the game, we prefer to explore the space further, make changes based on that exploration. Cool. Be nice if you could show us if you feel that some of the changes you made aren't good or aren't well received, maybe roll them back. And I'm not saying little changes. I'm talking about the passives. You've made changes to the passives a little bit, but I have seen no change to the healing path. Anyway, with that said, we're looking at running a series of events to try out different team composition formats in Overwatch 2. Good. Community has just one or twice suggested a test. You think? Why not put various forms of 6v6 in a game in order to gauge the results? We agree. And based on your feedback, we're exploring how we can test the different forms of 6v6 in game to gauge the results. This is taking some time, however, for reasons not readily apparent. The first and honestly largest reason is the need to do this in a way that allows the game to have optimized technical performance. We're referring to frame rate and memory constraints with 12 players in a match. They're talking about Switch. Because realistically, I don't think you have problems like that with PCs because you can upgrade or do things and it's been around for a while. So I don't think that's it, but maybe there's an engine issue. I don't know. First and honestly largest reason is we need to do this in a way that allows the game to have optimized technical performance. I'm referring to frame rate and memory constructs with 12 players in the match. There have been quite a few upgrades in addition to Overwatch 2 that have an impact on the performance of the game. I guess some of the lighting, maybe extra stuff. These range from features like allied outlines, enabling healer vision by default, in addition to more technical demanding hero kits, as well as visual upgrades to UI. Some, but not most, and maps. In 6v6 setting, these upgrades can have significant impact for our players and causing the game to underperform on older system. Overwatch is a fast-paced game, and maintaining the game that runs smoothly across all our platforms is important for the play experience. I should hope so. While a limited test could arrive sooner, the team is still investigating how long it would take to permanently increase the performance across the game. This would be a huge effort that's most likely to take several seasons to accomplish. Translation: they don't want to have a colored thing that they put it out there and then it runs horribly. Okay, peace. Another issue, and one that still gives us anxiety about opening up Pandora's box, is that what do you do with queue times if enough players prefer 6v6 to keep some of it around? The team was not able to solve this issue previously. While some ideas, we have some ideas now, there's no guarantee they will work, and there is a world where people are willing to live without long queue times to play this format. Maybe that's a pretty risky move to make. We also have tens of millions of players that have only played 5v5, and we want to be open mindful not to frustrate those who would like the game as it is today. The outcome of these tests would give us a lot of valuable information to consider moving forward. We will run the test a few weeks, engage the interest from the community, and then we'll measure the impact it had over the other experiences in Overwatch 2, like 5v5 Arcade. We'll take the lessons from this playtest to see what can we learn from the mode within the current game ecosystem and the future of Overwatch. We would like to reflect carefully on the leanings from whatever test we run and explore how to best give players what's being asked for. Whether it's the world of 5v5 or 6v6 or even both, the future is us to figure out. I'm going to jump on the soapbox here for a moment. When you look at the changes to Overwatch since inception, it's clear that many of those have reduced some of the variety within Overwatch match. We get the feedback from some players that Overwatch can feel the same from game to game. While much of that it gets you treated 5v5, we feel that there's more at play here besides running experience with 6v6. We like to run some that re-examine the ways we tried solving previous problems, specifically with the goal of bringing some of the freedom back to Overwatch matches without the severity of the issues of accompanying it. For instance, there could be ways to putting a team together that aren't quite as rigid as set composition, but not as loose as open queue. We'll be running at least one quick play hack based on this idea in Season 13. There are some gotchas to this direction, but after reading 400 pages of a blog, I hope you're willing to see that there are trade-offs of many of these decisions that go into the game and into any game, really. Wrap it up now. Your feedback has been driven by our inspiration and commitment to testing these new ideas in game, and we want to be super thoughtful about how we implement new ideas into the live game because there's millions of players who jump in Overwatch each season. We want anything we put in the game to be a benefit to the community as a whole. Ultimately, Overwatch team wants to build a game that you want to play season after season. This blog, or the thesis rather, is the start of that conversation. This isn't the last time you're going to be getting into 5v5 or 6v6, and we can't wait to share more about our plans in the future. In closing, we appreciate your so much and love seeing your passion and dedication to the game, Team 4, and the Overwatch community. The team hears you, we see you, and we're incredibly thankful to be on this ride with you all. We can't wait to share more in the upcoming months. Let's make a great game together. So, thoughts. Deep thoughts with Magus. So, what do I think? Well, here's my thought. The format's not the only problem with it. At the beginning of Overwatch 2, yes, there was more freedom. We could move around a little bit more. But also, I don't know how much of that was them reworking maps, right? You got to remember, they reworked a bunch of maps to make it more open, more flowy. Part of that was to give Hammond the ability to do what he needs to do. And also, they open up paths to allow more flow. It had nothing to do with the format change 5v5, 6v6. Part of their problems are twofold. One, they have passives. The passives with the healing and everything else got so egregious and whatnot, it made it impossible for anything to die. You could have two healers focusing your one tank. You had two tanks that made it harder because then you had to kind of manage and heal and what are you doing, right? So you couldn't focus one tank, but it also made it hard for the DPS or other people to focus on one tank on the other team. Would it slow down the game? Yes, it would slow down the game. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Well, it depends. We have other things in play right now that we didn't have before. We didn't have the DPS passive, we didn't have the healer passive, and if you want to say to a certain extent, we didn't have the tank stuff. Okay, peace. Problem is the healer thing with the healing. Yes, they have a bunch of kit, and the healing allows them to sustain this up to a bit. Personally, I think the DPS passive, it gives them a good identity and it's cool. I think for the tank, not giving them more armor, not making them big kaiju bosses with crazy 1,000 HP hit points, I don't think that's right. I think that if you want to give some type of, don't make it a roll pass. I don't think it'll work. It doesn't translate well. What they should do is remove CC from all the other characters because they weren't supposed to be in there in the first place, and they weren't during Overwatch 2's initial launch. Give CC abilities to the tank. Make them crowd control. Okay. DPS does damage and makes it hard to heal. Makes sense. Healers, when they're not being attacked upon, can heal up because that's what they're good at. Cool. That way they can focus their healing on healing other people. Tanks should be about controlling the crowd. I think that's really the right answer for that. Now, here's the thing. Are they willing to rework the tanks? And that's the sticky wicket. To make 5v5 work, they would have to rework the tanks. And they haven't reworked it. They have not fixed Reinhardt. They have not fixed all the various other tanks like Zarya and some of the other ones. Some of them have less issues because they were initially built kind of broken, if you will, like Sigma and some of the others. They have reworked Orisa. She's fairly good, but I think the problem is they ran out of creativity what they wanted with Orisa, and they left the Fortify in. And I think that's the most painful thing to fight against. And I think they could go other directions with her, with a rework to make her better. But other reworks just don't fly well. I mean, you look at Hog, he's kind of annoying. He does way too much damage. He seems kind of one dimensional. Yeah, you can hook. The trap doesn't do much. I think they need to do more to rework Hog to make him do more. And that's the thing. You know, you have other heroes. A good example is Juno with the Space Ranger. She feels like she was a person that was designed as a 5v5 Overwatch 2 hero. Roadhog, even with rework, does not, right? So if they want to keep the 5v5, that's what they need to do to try to make tank feel impactful and like it's doing something, because just standing there is not good enough, because then you have to have crazy HP or have fortify, and then that's not fun to play against. And then when you take headshot away, what are you doing, right? So there's that. The other thing you would also need to do that I think to help the game is part of the sexy allure of Overwatch was the ultimates. I could do a DV bomb and it could like do some damage. Right now, a lot of those things don't work very well. Or oop, Suzu, up Suzu, up Suzu. They had a little bit of a thing before where you had lamp, but now you have both those together. It makes it even worse. Yeah, Zenyatta's thing kind of made you invulnerable, but I was okay with that because that was an ult. So you were wasting an ult to take care of an ult, and that's fine. But it should never be tied to a cooldown, right? So I think in that regard, um, they need to be willing to fix things. I think it's okay for Suzu to get rid of bleed and burn and things like that, or sleep. Peace. That makes lots of sense. They at least fixed one of it that it doesn't like, oh, wake you up and you automatically get knocked back up again, you know, when you get knocked down by Reinhardt or whatever. I think that's a bit ridiculous, right? But they need to rework characters, and I just don't know if they're willing to put in the work. The stopgap measure would be 6v6 to a degree. It will help balance out the tanks they decided not to rework, because you had a thing called a main tank and an off tank. So you could have a Reinhardt, not that this is a good combo, a Reinhardt with a Roadhog. The Roadhog could hook people, pull them out of position, kind of pelt them away, and be there. Where the Reinhardt could protect them, and then if they get up close, he could do some damage and whatnot, so they could complement and take care of each other, right? You would also bring their HP down and everything else like that, and make them more attainable on being able to kill them, because now you don't have to make two tanks be one person, right? So that's cool. Maybe they'd have 350 health. They'd be a little stronger than a DPS, but not a lot. What that solves is it solves their problem with balancing and redoing the characters that they have not been willing to put the effort into completely. They've done a little bit, but not enough. Um, when it comes to, will it fix the problems? No. Like I said before, those problems are going to carry over and still going to be an issue when it comes to 6v6. And that's of interest. Now, the other reason why it's going to take a little bit of work with the 6v6 thing, they say performance, but I think the other reason why is because you have to do the same level of changes that they did back in season 9, where they had to bump all the HP back up. I'm willing to believe they'll probably won't do this till probably mid-cycle. They're saying a few seasons. I'm figuring they're talking about probably next year, about the same time season 9 hit, right? Because that's going to be a big overall. We'll see. But they're also talking about shorter changes where, okay, maybe they allow 2 roles or maybe 1 role to flex between the roles. And that could add variability without breaking, right? Again, it's not going to fix the problem. It'll take away some of the sameness to a bit, but it's not going to fix the problem. The only way you can fix the problem is you have to change the gameplay loop. And right now, the gameplay loop is pretty simple. You pick guys on a team, you go out, you fight some people, you do some stuff. If you get taken out, you come back, you either choose another character or you choose the same character and you go forward. That's it. Does not change. Maybe Mercy raises you from the time to time, but that's it. There's no change in that loop, right? However, I understand the game system they were introducing, though I did not approve of passives in general that were blanketed because I didn't think it worked as well. But having different abilities, just 3, nothing crazy, just 3, right? For each of the characters, that as you play the game or the match, and you get so many eliminations or so much damage or whatever, it can lock your ability to take your character in different directions. A good example of that would be a Junkrat. Let's say I want to do spam a choke. Okay, give me a lot more ammo. Go ching 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 ching, and maybe faster. Launching, right. Maybe there's one with a larger area of effect. I want to be able to you know grenade the heck out of it really good, right? Or maybe stronger actual hits. I need something to be a tank buster. You could choose to do that. And one of the benefits of doing that is that's going to cut down, just like the 6v6 would, on tank swapping. When you have one tank and you have to make a decision, do I change out because Zarya is going to do better against D.Va? Because you can basically negate her matrix. With 2 tanks, it becomes less of an issue. With me having to choose whether I swap and lose my experience and start from scratch, or take on this other ability and stick with it, I think that would help with some of that, right? But the other benefit it has is now you got to guess, because there's variability. What kind of Junkrat am I fighting? What am I going against, right? So you got to be a little bit more thoughtful and plan it out and kind of gauge what's going on and adjust properly. And again, you could also go back to Spawn and you could maybe change it, or maybe it locks it in. We'd have to play with it. That's a way to make the gameplay loop different, right? It gives you a ceiling of progression in the match instead of out of it. And everyone starting at 0 at the beginning of the match also helps when it comes to baselining, right? Because you don't want to carry it from round to round. Because that would be hard, especially if someone's snowballing. But then another option is you could take an idea out of Marvel's pages. So in Marvel Rivals, they have the ability to combine characters. Now, mind you, it's third person, and you can do a little bit more with that. But What if you had a Widowmaker that decided to do a hook into Orion as he's, charging forward and catches a ride? That'd be kind of cool. Or what if, Hanzo got on the back of Arisa? There's a voice line for that, right? And he's on the back and he's firing, but he's somewhat protected by Arisa a little bit, right? Now, mind you, there would be trade offs. Obviously, Widow being pulled in by Ryan, okay, it might allow her to do this or that, but then, you know, you're putting her in the danger zone, essentially, right? Or maybe pull her out. I don't know. But then, with the Orisa thing, well, if you come up with a Ryan hammer and hit at Orisa, you could also be, you know, not able to get out of the way as easily because you're on top of Orisa, and you could be in danger as Hanzo. So it'd make it interesting. It would make for interesting pairings, which I think would be kind of cool. And it would add variety to the game as well. That would change the gameplay loop of it. Maybe do all of the above. I don't know. But what I can tell you is they're willing to experiment and they're willing to do these quick play hacks, which I think are good. It gives you the numbers you need on the user base you want. You can get the feedback because it seems like you have, I don't know if it's enough feedback from the general community because you need to not listen to just the streamers, um, but also um, you're willing to see, is it going to work the way you intended? Maybe it proves you wrong, and okay, maybe 6v6 is a good thing, right? Maybe the Q times aren't as bad. Maybe the reason why people didn't play tank back then, 100%, was because they didn't understand how tank roles worked. You got to remember, a lot of the shooters back then, there weren't tank roles. They only knew FPSs with Call of Duties and things like that. And that's a thing, right? More people are exposed to tanks now because of the role queues and everything that's going on. The more people are aware of it. I think one of the reasons why you still have queue times right now is because tank is horrible right now. So people don't want to queue tank. That's your problem right now when it comes to queue times. So it could potentially have a positive effect or not as negative effect as what they think it's going to have, right? So we'll see. We'll give it a try and give our feedback and whatnot, and hopefully, it'll be a much better game. And they'll try some things because I'm seeing people trying out Marvel Rivals. It's not 100% the same, but people are looking for things that are a little bit different. And since we cannot depend upon that, we know of any type of you know show coming out or no guarantee we're going to get any cinematics like we used to. We haven't had a cinematic in a long time. The last one was Sojourn. Was the last cinematic where it was like fully done, like dragons and things like that, instead of hand drawn or whatever. Um, that's a thing. We got one for you know our collaboration things, but that's not the same, right? And I think that's the other thing is if you don't have that in a Netflix show, I think it makes it hard. And I think there should be a concerted effort to either you do those for character specific ones, or you need to have a show or something where if you don't do it in game, it might be cheaper and easier and better if you seasonally release, hey, here's what's going on in Overwatch, and then you could tie in adding in heroes that correlate to that or changes to the heroes. Maybe there's a new skin for Overwatch 2 because Reinhardt lost his hair, or something happened to Brigitte or whatever, right? You could do those things and it would make it more interesting and it would feel more alive. That's another thing they're missing out on that they don't do very good about, and get better with timing things. When you have something to show or should have something to show, you need to time with these big shows like the Xbox Showcase and things. You're owned by Microsoft. There's no reason Pink Mercy shouldn't have been in that. So we'll see. I mean, they're learning, they're listening, so that helps a little bit. But we'll see how that goes. If you like what you saw with my commentary, please give me a like and a subscribe. Of course, I stream every Monday, Wednesday, Thursday at 9:30 at twitch.tv/gaming with Magus. I stream a variety of games, and of course, I play Overwatch from time to time whenever on stream. Whether there's a new patch, there's a new hero, maybe there's a new game mode or something like that. reaction to a video trailer or whatnot. And of course, you should be following my social media so you know when things change or anything comes out, or you want to reach out to me, make a suggestion of game you want to see me play. Whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter X, that'd be great. But until next time, stay adventurous.